going to take a deeper look inside the Big Sky presented by Visit Pocatello. Colter, UNC sitting on top of the men's standings, perfect 6-0 conference record. Reigning tournament champs, Montana State, are close to the bottom. What has surprised you the most on the men's side this season?
Well, certainly those two, definitely. It's been interesting to watch at Northern Colorado because Northern Colorado has actually had a ton of star power over the last several years, and they've been middle to like top of the bottom tier of the league, even with guys like Dalton Connect. And then when Connect left and that whole group sort of moved on with Bodie Hume and Matt Johnson and all those great players that didn't really have the season that I think that they expected to have. Now without sort of like that headlining guy, and make no mistake, Langston Reynolds is becoming one of those guys. But without that headlining guy, they've shown just great continuity so far. MSU has had a hard time gelling, I think. But if you look back at last year, that was also the case. And what the Bobcats do, they put it all together and made one of the epic runs we've ever seen in the Big Sky tournament. So I would not count out Matt Logie's team yet. And then my other two that I wrote down were Montana being up and down a little bit. And a lot of that's just been their struggles on the road. And the reason I think it's surprising they've been up and down because I think they have great talent. I mean, I think Money Williams is one of, if not the most talented guys in the league. Joe Pridgeon is an outstanding power forward. And then the last one's just Idaho State and Idaho both being better and being ahead of both Northern Arizona and Eastern Washington in the standings. Maybe something I didn't expect.
On the women's side, Montana State 16-2, also perfect in conference play. Why have the Bobcats been so dominant in the women's game this season?
Well, I'll give you 4. Depth, they play 10, and that's a ridiculous number to have 10 capable players. Role acceptance. I mean, Taylor Jansen was a starter for 2 years. She comes back for her super senior year. She's coming off the bench, and she's totally accepted it and been great. They have awesome team chemistry, but more than anything, it's the defense. I mean, they are 7th in the country in steals per game. They're forcing 23 turnovers per game. They're unbelievable defensively, especially getting in the passing lanes, and I think that's what's led to this hot start, both in non-conference and conference play.
Who are some of the players, specifically men and or women, who have really emerged for you this season?
Well, start with the NAU women. I think Taylor Feldman has been a revelation. She who reminds me of Reagan Skank so much. Skank was a 4-year starter and the direct extension of Lori Payne on the court. And Feldman's like a Skank clone, except for she's even better in certain ways. Skank was an all-time great in the Big Sky. Don't get me wrong. So that's big shoes to fill. But I love the way Taylor Feldman's playing right now. She's the one that makes Leah Beatty and Sophie Glancy so much better. The other one on the women's side is Taylor Chirick, and that's maybe a name that people – listen to this, haven't heard of about as much. She's coming off the bench as a true freshman at Montana State, but she comes from a Class C high school in Montana, Roberts High School, which probably has 100 kids. And her impact on games, she's still very unpolished. She still has a lot of room to grow. But her speed, I mean, she's one of the great track athletes, period, in the history of the state of Montana, and her aggressiveness, because she comes off the bench, they can just absolutely cut her loose. And she's been just wreaking havoc in the full court press, and she gives them so many great minutes off the bench. On the men's side, the two I highlighted were Joe Pridgeon at Montana. He's a transfer from Northeastern. I like to say about Joe Pridgeon, every team in the Big Sky could use a Joe Pridgeon. You don't need to draw out plays for him. He's an awesome offensive and defensive rebounder. He runs the floor in transition. He plays with a high motor. He guards. He does all the little things that coaches love. And then the other one's Dyson Kohler. I know Brett Hine that works at the Standard Examiner there in Ogden. He wrote about Kohler in the offseason about how he was going to take a big jump. And he compared him to guys with work ethics like Damian Lillard. And I was like, man, that's pretty lofty for Brett to say that. But Brett has covered him for a long time. Well, Kohler has almost lived up to that. He's been great. He was the Big Sky Conference Player of the Week last week. He's shooting the ball tremendously well. And he's kind of the guy that makes it go for Weber State.
For more from Colter, he hosts Around the Big Sky Women's Hoops with Krista Redpath Wednesdays at 4 and Around the Big Sky's Men Hoops Thursdays at 4, all on Skyline Sports. Colter, thanks so much for joining me, and I will see you next week.
Thanks so much for having me.